Ambassador, the UK government recently published a policy paper regarding the point-based immigration policy. Could you talk a little about this, and especially about the, and I quote from the policy paper, that this policy aims to attract people that will contribute to the UK's economy?
Yeah. Thank you. Well, this has been expected for a very long time. The government has made clear for well over a year that as soon as we left the European Union and at the end of the transition period, that there would be a new points-based system loosely based on the Australian model, and that's now the policy paper that has come out. It's still something that's being developed because all of the, it's given us the main lines of the policy, it hasn't told us the exact detail of how it will be achieved. The most important thing to say, I think, especially in Romania, is that this is an immigration policy for people who want to come and live in the UK. So it is not important for the Romanians who are already registered in settled or pre-settled scheme in the UK. All of their rights are guaranteed by the withdrawal agreement for life. It doesn't apply to visitors to the UK. So you will be able to go as an ordinary tourist or as an ordinary business visitor and stay for the usual amount of time before you're looked at as being an immigrant. So with that, I think already we've decided de facto that it doesn't apply to the great majority of Romanians who will either be living in Romania, in the UK as residents, or just travelling. So for those who wish to go and live, there will be a new system in which they need to apply. There will be various categories that special rules will apply to. And the great majority of skilled workers will have no difficulty getting through this system, which is, it is more onerous than a system of free movement, but the government is clear that free movement must end. But this is the way that the needs of our economy will still be met, and I think we'll find that the needs of Romanians who wish to emigrate and live in the UK will also be met.
Still, you were talking about Romanians in the UK, and I think there are quite some seasonal workers, Romanian seasonal workers, and in the policy papers it specified that there will be a visa pilot scheme for seasonal workers. Can you give us an outline about this? Will it be more complicated? Does it seem that it will be more complicated for them to navigate through this?
Well, the pilot takes place in 2020, a time in which any Romanian who wishes to go to the UK can do so, including seasonal agricultural workers. So for this year, the pilot scheme doesn't apply to Romanians who have much greater freedom. We expect it to apply from next year, but this is a pilot scheme. We've increased the numbers by 4 times in 2020. What the numbers will be in 2021, we do not yet know.
Also, will it specify that the point system could be also applied to students?
Yes.
How will this be applied? Because students usually were relying on the fact that they were going to Great Britain, they were relying on a scholarship or on a more flexible system than this.
I think this is, I mean, it was a more open system because in free movement, any Romanian could go to the UK for any purpose at any time. This is much clearer. Students need to have an offer from an educational establishment. They need to demonstrate that they have the level of English, and they need to demonstrate that they can support themselves in the UK. These are very normal requirements for any immigration system. And they would then qualify under the points. They would be able to apply under the points-based system. And our intention is that we will grow the number of international students at British universities by a very considerable factor. I think it's important to look at what the government intention is. If we're going to increase the number of international students, it has to be a system which already applies in for most of the rest of the world that actually facilitates that. So I have great confidence that Romanian students in the future are not going to face difficulties. But again, I need to emphasise that this doesn't apply until the academic intake at the end of 2021. Because for students who wish to start their studies in 2020, in the academic year 2020-2021, they will still qualify as home students with access to government funding and on the basis that they have enjoyed hitherto. So again, the new scheme will only kick in for the academic year that begins in September 2021.
You were talking about the settled status and the pre-settled status that EU citizens living in the UK already got.
Yeah.
But I talked to Romanians who got the pre-settled status or the settled status, and their concern, I don't know if it's actually a concern, was that this status is very volatile. They don't have a paper with it. They don't have anything. Did you hear about this concern, and how would you address it?
I've heard about that concern a lot, and at a certain level I understand it, and at a certain level I share it. Because for certain government services in the UK, I don't have a piece of paper either. It's partly driven by our environmental concerns. You know, why produce loads of bits of plastic that are going to end up in the sea to abbreviate the process? You know, there's a huge awareness about making the way that we live sustainable. So the other thing is to improve access to government services. And almost all government services now in the UK are accessible online. And we have moved to an online world. And there is an interconnectivity which makes life very straightforward. And the same applies to the registration scheme for settled and pre-settled status. You have to remember, in the UK, I don't have an ID document. I don't have a registration requirement to tell the police where I live or where I've moved to. And those are inherent freedoms of living in the United Kingdom. And the requirement to have a piece of paper to say, this is who I am, these are my rights, is very much against the British way of life, that's still very, very valued. So actually what we're doing is treating our registered EU citizen population in exactly the same way as we treat the British population. We're not treating them differently. I understand if you're coming from a country like Romania, where there's a very low level of government service provided online, it's a shock. It's not comfortable, but it works. I see how it works in my everyday requirements with the UK, whether I'm registering a car or whether I'm doing my NHS prescription charges or whatever. None of that generates a piece of plastic. So I understand the concern, but I don't think there's a real problem about it.
And also I was talking to Romanian citizens who have the settled status in the UK, and also they said that because of various reasons they did not apply for British citizenship. But what about now with Brexit? Will there be a surge in applying for British citizenship in case they meet the conditions, but they did not bother to ask for it?
I find it impossible to tell you whether there's going to be a surge or not, because believe it or not, I don't know how many Romanians have already got British citizenship. I mean, it's something that we are exploring, but it's not something that is routinely fed to embassies. Will there be a surge? I think is extremely difficult to say. Clearly, being a British citizen is one thing. Having the permanent rights that the settled status scheme gives you is clearly another, but it's already very, very good indeed. I don't know what the development there is going to be. The really important thing, and I hope everybody listening to this will talk to their relatives who are in the UK, or those who will still go. Because of course, to settle in the UK under the settled or pre-settled status scheme, you don't have to be there yet. You can arrive even as late as the 31st of December this year, and as long as you can demonstrate that you were a resident by the 31st of December this year, you can still qualify under the settlement scheme. So whether those people will or not in the future ask for citizenship, I really don't know.
At the end of the policy paper published on the UK government, there is a study quoted, and it says that under the recent conditions, about 70% of the European Economic Area citizens who arrived in the UK since 2004 would have not been eligible. Would you comment on this?
I suspect that's true. Because under free movement, you could, as a Romanian 17-year-old, decide that you wanted to go to school in the UK. Well, so far, I don't think there is a proposal for people who want to go to school. Or you could just go on holiday and actually decide to take work. What this scheme requires is that you have the job offer, you have the place to study at university, and it's fundamentally looking at economically active people. It's much more difficult under the future for people of pensionable age, for example, to go and live in the UK. So this is a difference. This is a different policy. It's intended to have a different impact. The ending of free movement of labour, which is actually what the EU provision is supposed to be about, but it in reality is free movement of people. But we're actually going back to much more a labour-focused immigration system, which is what the EU scheme should in itself be. So I'm not surprised at those gross figures. What I would say, though, is that even if at the point of entry there was a very large proportion of people who would not have qualified under this scheme, very shortly after they went, they would have. So you, in a way, in the old system, you could go to the UK, have thinking time, and then meet the sort of criteria that we've established in this policy paper. Under the policy paper, you have to do your thinking time here, which is a lot cheaper than thinking time in the UK. So, you know, I think the ultimate outcome might not be very different. And certainly, you know, in respect to students, we've got about 10,000 Romanian students in the UK at the moment. With the rate of growth that the British government wishes to achieve in international students, it's difficult to see how we'll get to our target figure without that number of 10,000 Romanian students going up.
And in the policy papers, it's also specified that this particular point-based immigration system will have benefits, of course, but it also have costs. Can you foresee what the costs of this point-based immigration system will be? Or?
I think the main costs I've heard discussed are the costs of implementing it. And I would expect the cost of implementing it to be met from the beneficiaries. So those who will benefit from it will contribute significantly towards its cost, which is what already happens. British citizens' passports include a fee to help pay for consular assistance overseas. Existing people who nowadays need a visa, the visa fee sustains the visa service, and I would expect that to be continued. But this is, as you say, a policy paper. This is not the implementation document, and that there's a chance that some of the details may change between now and the implementation dates of the 1st of January. I don't know what that might be, but it's not absolutely what the reality will be like at the end of this year.
In the context of Brexit, the UK has, it's a premiere that it has a magistrate liaison in Romania.
Yeah.
Could you talk about this? What will the magistrate liaison do, and how will he analyze the rule of law, I guess, in Romania? What are the outlines of this job here?
Well, first of all, the first point is that he's not going to be part of the embassy team and analysing the rule of law in Romania. That's done by other teams within the embassy who are looking at the internal governance of Romania and our political relationship. So our liaison magistrate, John Williams, is there to be a link, the liaison between our court systems. So this is part of our law enforcement work, which is huge. We've got 50 Romanian policemen with us this week, focusing on how UK and Romania can work better to prevent the sexual exploitation of children. So we're already doing a lot on law enforcement, and John is there to link the court systems and the prison systems. So he will be shuttling backwards and forwards from his desk, understanding Romanian requirements, understanding British requirements, and giving advice on how they can best be met. We've had visitors this week also from the Central Authority in the UK, that's the organisation in the UK who receive Romanian requests of the British legal and penal system and implement those requests in the UK. So they've been here to understand what Romanians would like our system to do better and to tell them how actually really high quality we think Romanian paperwork already is. So John's job is about taking an already very high level, a very high quality level of cooperation to an even higher level. There have been issues on past extraditions, for example, about prison conditions in Romania. And as you probably know, in European Court of Human Rights, there are a lot of Romanian cases relating to prison conditions. There are answers to that. That doesn't need to be the blockage to extradition of offenders back to Romania that it has been in the past. And that's one of the big things that the liaison magistrate will help with. Just smoothing out two different systems to produce the joint objective of reducing the criminality in our two countries and that exists between our two countries in both directions. This is not an issue of Romanian criminals in the UK only. It's also about British criminals in Romania. It's a very shared problem, and the solutions are getting easier with the appointment of the liaison magistrate.
Next week there will be negotiations starting between the EU and the UK about the trade deal. Well, in non-bureaucratic terms, what are the fears and hopes that the UK is going to negotiate? Before the negotiations, what are the UK's fears and hopes?
Well, I'm not sure I've got fears. The hope is that it will produce, under a lot of time pressure, an arrangement which enables us to trade easily between the EU and the UK in goods and services, and that many other of the components of our life together in the EU, the areas that we both prioritise, that we can find easy agreements for those to be maintained going forwards. It is a very short time frame, that's clear, but with the right sort of political will and with the right understanding on both sides of what it is in the real world that people want to achieve. I think under those circumstances, we can certainly achieve a very good deal for all of our citizens going forwards.
Do you think the UK and the EU got to a level of more understanding each other after so many discussions before Brexit? Do you have a feel that there's more understanding between Brussels and London now?
Well, I think increasing understanding is demonstrated by the fact that we eventually got to a withdrawal agreement that both sides could support. You know, we had not been in that position for quite some time, and the inability of the House of Commons to support previous versions of the withdrawal agreement were a demonstration that we hadn't got quite far enough. We did get that far at the end of the year. The withdrawal agreement has provided a really good basis for our citizens to continue with their lives, and now we look forward to re-establishing components of the relationship in a whole number of dossiers that are all continuing this year in the transition year as they did in the past, but we now need to find a new basis for that. And so my hopes far outweigh my fears. I don't really believe that the EU and the UK as two such important partners. I doubt that they can ignore the real practical advantages that their citizens need. And if they do, I think we'll have to say to our negotiators, try a bit harder, because this is what we need as member states, as ordinary citizens of Europe.